He filed for divorce the day after her father died. While she was at the hospital, identifying her father's body, her husband of 11 years was already on the phone with a lawyer. He gave her 2 weeks to get out. He had already moved on, to a woman he believed was worth more. A family he thought was better. A life he felt he deserved. He called her ordinary. He was wrong, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. And by the time he found out, there was nothing left he could do about it. Margaret had been married to David Caldwell for 11 years. The early years were good, comfortable, real. But somewhere around year 4, year 5, David started looking at their life differently. Like it was a step he had already climbed. Like Margaret was someone he had outgrown. David grew up working class in New Jersey. He had worked hard to get where he was. Regional sales director. Good salary. Nice apartment in Manhattan. He was proud of what he had built, but it was never enough. He wanted more. Not just money, status, the right dinner tables, the right zip codes, the right family name standing next to his. And then, at a corporate event in Manhattan in the fall of 2021, he found what he thought he was looking for. Her name was Victoria Langston, daughter of Charles Langston, a prominent New York real estate developer with deep connections across the city. Old money, established family, exactly the world David had been reaching for his entire adult life. Within 6 months, they were involved. Within a year, David had made his decision. The Langston family had opinions about Margaret. Charles Langston looked her up once. Hospital administrator, state school degree. Father lives alone in Queens. He told Victoria, "David can do better than this." Victoria's mother was more direct. She said Margaret was, and I want you to hear this exact word, ordinary. She called Margaret ordinary. She would not use that word again after March 2023. To understand what happens next, you need to understand Raymond Hargrove. Raymond lived in the same modest house in Queens for 38 years. Drove a 2011 Toyota Camry he maintained carefully. Shopped at the same grocery store on the same day every week. He tipped his waitress exactly 20%. Always, never more, never less. His daughter thought he was a retired property manager. Comfortable, simple, careful with money. He was not simple. For 45 years, quietly, patiently, invisibly, Raymond Hargrove had been building something. It started small. A single rental property in Queens in 1978. He fixed it up himself on weekends, rented it out, saved everything, bought another one 2 years later, then another, then another. He never sold. He never borrowed more than he could handle. He never drew attention to himself. Every property was held under a company name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. By the time Raymond died, he owned properties across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Quiet investments in several private businesses. Assets carefully managed across multiple accounts. His total estate was just under $10 billion. $10 billion. Built over 45 years. By a man in Queens who drove a Toyota Camry and tipped exactly 20%. Raymond knew he was running out of time. He had known for about 2 years. He didn't tell Margaret. That was Raymond. He handled things quietly, completely, without drama. He spent the last 2 years of his life doing what he had spent the previous 45 doing. Preparing, protecting, making sure his daughter would never fall. He died on a Tuesday morning in March 2023. Cardiac arrest. In his sleep. In the house he had lived in for 38 years. And in a locked filing cabinet in his attorney's office in Midtown Manhattan, an envelope with Margaret's name had been waiting for exactly this moment. Margaret came to that meeting expecting to hear about the house in Queens, maybe some savings, a small investment account. She brought a notepad. The attorney began to read. Property holdings across 3 states, valued at approximately $4.2 billion. Private business investments, valued at approximately $2.8 billion. Cash accounts, savings, and managed assets, approximately $2.9 billion. Total estate, $9.9 billion. Margaret Caldwell, who drove a 6-year-old Honda Civic, who packed her lunch every day, who had once stressed for 2 weeks over an unexpected $1,500 expense, had just inherited nearly $10 billion. She didn't speak for a long time. The attorney would later say she simply sat there, completely still. And then, very quietly, she said, "Why didn't he tell me? He didn't want it to change you. He needed to know what you were made of first." His words, Margaret. He said them to me every single year round. She drove home in her 6-year-old Honda, sat in the driveway for 40 minutes, hands on the wheel, engine off, staring at nothing, and then she broke, not in front of the attorney, not in front of David, not in front of anyone who could use it against her, just there, alone in that car, in front of the house she was about to be told to leave. She cried for her father, for the years he had carried this alone, for the letter she hadn't read yet, for the marriage she had tried so hard to hold together, for every moment she had made herself smaller, quieter, less, because she thought that was what love required. She cried until there was nothing left, and then she wiped her face, straightened her coat, and walked inside, not as the woman David Caldwell had underestimated, as Raymond Hargrove's daughter. She would tell David about the inheritance, but not the amount, not yet. She told him her father had left a substantial estate, property, some investments, things that would take time to sort through. She was calm, steady. David nodded slowly, then he set his fork down and said words he had clearly been rehearsing for a long time. "Maggie, we need to talk about us. I think we both know this hasn't been working for a long time. I think it's time we go our separate ways. I've met someone." "Is there someone else, David?" "Yes. Someone I see a real future with." She had known. Not the name, not all the details, but she had known. The late nights. The phone always face down on the table. The way he had slowly stopped being present, even when he was standing right in front of her. She had known for months. What she didn't know, what she only found out 3 days later, was the timeline. March 13th. Raymond Hargrove passes away. March 14th. David Caldwell calls a divorce attorney. March 15th. David begins preliminary divorce paperwork. March 17th. David tells Margaret she has 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. He had called the lawyer the morning after her father died. While Margaret was still at the hospital, David was already planning his exit. 2 weeks. To grieve her father, pack her life, and get out of the home she had shared with him for 11 years. She said nothing that night. She went to bed, and the next morning, before David was even awake, she made a phone call of her own. To David, Margaret looked like she was handling it quietly. No scenes, no breakdowns, no angry messages. He told Victoria she was being mature about it. Victoria told her mother. Eleanor Langston said, "That's what happens when there's nothing to fight for." What was actually happening during those 2 weeks was something else entirely. Within 48 hours, Margaret had retained a team of top estate and family law attorneys in New York. She brought in a forensic accounting firm and a private legal strategist whose entire job was to protect large inherited estates from exactly this kind of situation. Because Raymond, who had quietly seen David Caldwell for exactly what he was, had spent years making sure this moment was covered. Raymond had kept records of everything. Every financial gift he had ever made to Margaret, documented, receipted, and legally classified as her separate personal property. Not marital property, hers alone. David's attorneys had built their case around arguing that Raymond's contributions had become part of the marital estate, that David was entitled to a share. They walked into a wall Raymond had spent 20 years building. Margaret's lead attorney later said, "I have handled hundreds of cases like this. I have never seen documentation this thorough." This man prepared for everything. By day 10, quiet rumors were moving through legal and financial circles in New York. People who knew things before the public did were starting to ask questions about the scope of Raymond's estate, about the legal team Margaret had assembled. Charles Langston heard the rumors on day 10. He made some calls. What he found out over the next 24 hours changed the entire tone inside the Langston household. On day 13, 1 day before David's deadline, Margaret picked up her phone and called her communications teams. "Schedule the press conference." She walked into that press conference in a simple dark dress she had owned for years. No jewelry except her mother's watch. No notes. Just herself. The room was full of reporters. Cameras. The low hum of people who sensed something significant was coming. She walked to the podium. She didn't rush. She didn't smile nervously. She didn't look like a woman who had just been handed a 2-week eviction notice by her husband. She looked like a woman who had spent 2 weeks deciding exactly how to respond to one. She looked at the room, and she spoke. "My father, Raymond Hargrove, spent his entire life building something, quietly, carefully, and without ever needing anyone to notice. He didn't build it for recognition. He built it for purpose. And today, in his name, that purpose begins. I am announcing the Raymond Hargrove Foundation, with an initial commitment of $500 million, focused on affordable housing and financial education right here in New York. For the people this city has always depended on and never quite gotten around to taking care of. This is my father's legacy, and it will be my life's work. She didn't mention David. Not once. She didn't need to. $500 million, as an opening commitment, from the woman her husband had given 2 weeks to leave. The room erupted. Questions from every direction. Cameras flashing. The story spreading before she had even left the building. And somewhere across the city, Charles Langston sat in his office watching a live stream. A man who had spent 40 years reading people and situations and knowing which way things were going to go. He watched Margaret at that podium, calm, certain, completely in control of a room full of people who had underestimated her 24 hours ago, and he understood, with the cold clarity of a man who has made and lost fortunes, that his family had made a very serious mistake. He picked up the phone, called his attorney, and said 4 words, "We need to talk." Eleanor Langston, who had called Margaret ordinary, sat at her dinner table that night and said nothing. Victoria said nothing either, but she was thinking. The divorce proceedings moved forward. David's legal arguments collapsed quickly against Raymond's documentation. Every claim his attorneys made, Raymond had already answered it, years ago. But the deposition still happened, and it was there, in a conference room in Midtown Manhattan, that the story reached its most defining moment. Mr. Caldwell. On March 14th, the morning after Raymond Hargrove passed away, "Did you contact a divorce attorney?" "I did." The attorney asked, "At that time, were you in a relationship with Victoria Langston?" "Yes." The attorney asked, "How long had that relationship been going on?" David answered, "Approximately 18 months. So while your wife was managing her father's declining health, you were involved with another woman. And the morning after her father died, before she had even left the hospital, you called a lawyer to begin ending your marriage." Yes, that one quiet word became the most talked about moment from any divorce proceeding in New York that year. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. David received his legal share of the marital assets, the apartment, joint savings, his own accounts, 11 years of a shared life, divided fairly according to the law. He received nothing from Raymond's estate, not $1, not one property, not one share of anything Raymond had spent 45 years building. But here is the part nobody saw coming. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Victoria Langston ended her relationship with David Caldwell. Let that sit for a moment. The woman he had chosen over Margaret, the family he had traded everything to be part of, gone. The official reason was vague. Different directions. Wrong timing. The kind of language people use when the truth is too uncomfortable to say plainly. But people close to the Langston family said the real conversation happened between Victoria and her father. And it went something like this. "Victoria, this man looked at an opportunity, a woman, a marriage, a life, and he completely misread it. He made a decision based on bad information and bad judgment. And when the truth came out, he had nothing. No leverage. No ground to stand on. Nothing. I have spent 40 years in business, and the one thing I have learned, the one thing that cannot be taught, is judgment. Either a man has it or he doesn't. David Caldwell doesn't have it." Victoria ended the relationship 2 days later. Think about what David Caldwell lost. He left a woman who turned out to be worth nearly $10 billion. He left her, while she was grieving, for a family that ultimately decided he wasn't good enough for them either. He didn't trade up. He traded everything for nothing. The woman he left, the woman he chose, both gone. And the life he was so desperate to escape was the best thing he ever had. Among everything Raymond left behind, there was one item that was not a legal document or a financial record. It was a handwritten letter, written 5 years before his death, addressed to Margaret. It said, Raymond's voice, warm, unhurried, the voice of a man who loved his daughter more than he ever knew how to say, "Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my attorney has done his job. I need to tell you some things I was never good at saying out loud. I built all of this for you, not to make you wealthy. Wealth alone ruins people. I built it so that no matter what happened, no matter who let you down, You would never be without options. You would never be trapped. You would always have a way out and a way forward. I kept it from you because I needed to know you could stand on your own first. And you did. You always did. From the time you were a little girl, you figured things out. You never quit. I watched you do it your whole life, and I was proud of you every single day. I also need to tell you something I should have said plainly a long time ago. I did not trust him. I saw the way he looked at our life, like it was never quite enough, like you were never quite enough. And you deserved better than that. You always deserved better than that. Everything I have built is yours now. Use it the way I taught you to use everything, carefully, with purpose, and always in service of something bigger than yourself. I love you more than I ever knew how to say. Dad. Margaret chairs the Raymond Hargrove Foundation today. Hundreds of millions committed to affordable housing and financial education across New York and beyond. She still lives in Raymond's house in Queens, kept it exactly the way he left it. She told an interviewer recently, "The money changed what I could do. It did not change who I am. My father made sure of that." David Caldwell still works in sales. Quieter life than he planned. The promotion he was chasing never came. The apartment he moved into after the divorce is smaller than the one he left. The BMW is gone. He doesn't give interviews. And here is what I want you to sit with before you go. David Caldwell did not lose because he was punished. He did not lose because life decided to teach him a lesson. He lost because of one thing and one thing only. He looked at Margaret Caldwell, a woman who packed her lunch, drove a 6-year-old Honda, and visited her father in Queens every single week, and he decided she was not enough. He never once asked himself, why is this woman so content? Why does she never complain about what she doesn't have? Why does she move through the world with that kind of quiet confidence? He never asked those questions, because he had already decided the answer. And Raymond Hargrove, in a Toyota Camry, in a house in Queens, tipping exactly 20%, had spent 45 years proving that the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody is watching. Raymond Hargrove drove a 2011 Toyota Camry, shopped at the same grocery store every week for 38 years, tipped exactly 20%, never more, never less. And he never once needed anyone to know what he was worth. Now I want to hear from you. When David made that call, the morning after her father died, was that cold calculation? Or was it a man in panic making the worst decision of his life? And this one, be honest with yourself when you answer it. Have you ever underestimated someone the way David underestimated Margaret? And what happened when you found out you were wrong? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, if you are still thinking about Raymond sitting in that house in Queens, building something extraordinary that nobody could see, subscribe. Because next week the story coming will make this one feel like a warm-up. I will see you then.